Ironside will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following special program.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. It's time again for Word Balloon Live. Tonight, it's an edition of the Big Bout Podcast where we talk about our favorite sport from the squared circle. And it's great to welcome our returning champions. We got Eddie Muller from Turner Classic Movies and, of course, Noir City and the godfather of Ringside Seat, the fantastic boxing magazine. It's good to see you, Eddie.
Hi. How are you guys? Good to see you. Good to meet you, Stephen. We have not met before, and I'm excited to do this because I liked your film so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get to our new guest in a second. Mike Kronenberg, good to see you from Ringside Seat and other Word Balloon Conversations. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I've admired Steve's social media stuff, all about Olympic, and I was just so excited to see that movie, and it's a terrific movie. I can't wait for so many people to see it. You know, music fans, boxing fans, wrestling fans. It's got something for everybody.
It's going to be a really fun conversation tonight because, again, to put a little more clarity on what we're all discussing, Stephen DeBro, am I saying it right? Is it DeBro? Is it?
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. Stephen DeBro has made this incredible documentary about the history of one of LA's great auditoriums that is a very different venue these days, the Olympic Auditorium, that goes back to the 20s and has an incredible history in boxing, wrestling, music, roller derby, amazing events, an amazing woman that was in charge of it, all part of the conversation today. And Stephen, forgive me, the title is not at my fingertips, so I'll let you give the title for the documentary. But welcome and thank you very much for making this incredible film. Give us the title.
18th and Grand, the Olympic Auditorium story.
Unbelievable. And coming from Chicago, where we've lost our great venues of the past, from the Coliseum to the amphitheater to the old Chicago Stadium, man, there's something, and again, all of us can obviously comment, there's something about a classic, venue. Thank God the Garden, even though it's the new Garden, of course, the new Garden's like, 60 years old now, Eddie, I'm guessing, something like that. Yeah. But no, it's great that some of these things still exist. And I know we just lost the Blue Horizon in the last few years in Philly and stuff. And that's what's great about this. And again, dovetailing into a lot of the other subjects we cover here on Word Balloon, Turner Classic Movies just did that, or showed that incredible documentary of the classic movie palaces that are, thank God, still standing in the country and stuff. And man, you can feel like you're in the Olympic because of your movie. And it's so great to have this movie bring that venue come to life. So again, as we've all said, congratulations, and tell us about the movie.
Well, thanks for the kind words and the great introduction. The Olympic, it was built in 25. It was a product at the time when LA was exploding in population, and the Olympic came around the same time as the Hollywood Bowl and a lot of other the Shrine Auditorium, a lot of other, larger auditoriums to meet the needs of this new population. And so the film traces the history of the building through time, through all of these great characters, through the story of Eileen Eaton, who's the woman who ran it, and Don Chargan, who was the matchmaker at the Olympic during one of its glorious eras of boxing. I feel is sort of the heart and soul of the movie in a lot of ways. He loved Eileen. He and his wife Lorraine and Eileen were almost this sort of platonic triumvirate who worked so hard to put on a great show at the Olympic for so long.
Eddie, did you have chances to go to the Olympic, either with your father, the fine boxing writer of San Francisco, or on your own?
That's one of the reasons I love this film so much. I never did go to the Olympic Auditorium. I was at the Main Street gym with my dad, but we were from the Bay Area, so the opportunity for me to actually be there on a fight night, when Eileen and Don were staging their weekly wars at the Olympic, I was just too young to go, but Don and Lorraine were close family friends of ours, and so I felt it all. I mean, honestly, the minute Don showed up, showing his room of all of his memorabilia and everything, I just got tears in my eyes because we were pretty close. And as I grew up and got older, they became friends of mine after my dad had passed away. So it was really, really a treat to see Don in this, and to see all that great footage of Eileen Eaton. It was just fantastic. What a character! What an incredible character she is.
Yeah, that was the hook for me when I got obsessed with the history of the building, but once Eileen was so singular and remarkable. I mean, she took over the building as the building manager in 1942. She'd never seen a fight before, and it was very fortunate for the Olympic, because the Olympic had been a white elephant. It really, struggled for, the first 15, 16 years of its existence to turn any kind of profit. It went into foreclosure immediately. It went over budget. And those were the days when, LA was so corrupt. It wasn't the mob at that time. It was the police and City Hall who were skimming everything. And there are all sorts of great stories of digging back into those early days, which we don't really get a chance to get into that deeply. But there was a scandal in the 20s where the sheriffs were stealing money from the, because it was in foreclosure. So the county, the county sheriffs were garnishing the gate, and those guys, they stole money. The sheriff's deputies were stealing money from the place. So lots of great characters. I mean, at its opening in 1925, it was Rudolph Valentino and Jack Dempsey. Jack Dempsey was there. It was his mural. Mural of him adorned the front of the building for decades.
Hey,
and
Steve, do you know who painted the mural?
I do not. It was not there originally. And I don't know what year it was. It was in the 40s or 50s when the Dempsey mural was painted on the building, because the original images of the building do not have that mural, and it was there until around 1980, 81, when the building was sold, and they sandblasted the mural off. They didn't just paint over it; they've sandblasted it off, and they took all of there were all these hand tinted photographs that lined the hallways of the building that were tossed away or given away. I've located 4 or 5 of them around the country that exist. That I know where. Yeah, I know where a couple of wrestling ones are, and I know where a couple of boxing. Someone recently showed up with the Jack Dempsey hand painted photograph framed that Eileen gave to them, which was amazing find. So that was the other thing that has been so amazing is the memorabilia and things that have just come that have been dislodged. It's been an archaeological project in some way of keeping both the relics and the culture. I felt like at a certain point in time, this was like a cultural preservation project because it was a dying culture. And I realized at some point that if I didn't interview these people, if I didn't document it when I started, which was started interviewing people in 2014, that the story would be unable to tell the story. No one could do it. And so it became this sort of race against time where I started with the oldest people first and then worked my way backwards because I didn't want to lose that opportunity. And so,
absolutely. Yeah. And building on that, God, I mean, I see a bunch of people that you did manage to get on camera that sadly aren't with us anymore. Dick Edberg immediately comes to mind. I don't know if Gene LaBelle is still with us or not.
He is.
So. Fantastic.
I spoke with his wife on the night of the premiere, which was last Thursday, because I invited Gene, of course, and he's 90 years old and his knees are sore, and
good Lord.
COVID has been so hard on everybody, but for older folks, I think it's been particularly isolating and difficult. And so I just wanted to send him some love and let him know that we were thinking about him, even though he couldn't be there. So Gene's alive. Mamie Van Doren's alive.
Yes, she is. That's amazing. She's in the movie as well.
She is.
90 years old. She just turned 90, yeah. And she's still posting nude pictures of herself on social media.
Yes, she is.
Those sexy pictures on social media, God love her. She's amazing. That was the thing. As I was watching, and I was just thinking about how so many of these people that you interviewed are gone. Yeah. And it's great that you did what you did and you started when you did, and you thought about it in that way to get these people on camera, because, that's part of what makes the movie so great is the recollections of these people, and the fact that you got Don and his, like Eddie was talking about,
room.
That moment where he's in his study and it's just lined with all that fantastic boxing memorabilia. So it's really a fantastic thing. I know we're probably going to get to this, but where does it go from here as far as like other people being able to see the movie? I mean, I know, we're dealing with COVID and with theaters and what's going on with theaters. You had your premiere at a drive-in. Is there any chance of it streaming?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a chance. I mean, that's the hope. This was a festival premiere. So,
okay.
We were the closing film for the Slam Dance Film Festival. So it was interesting. I mean, normally a film festival, these days film festivals are almost all virtual, which is, a kind of a bummer. And we were fortunate enough. To step back, we were scheduled to premiere at the Cinerama Dome. We had sold out the Cinerama Dome in March of last year, March 27th. And It was, and that was going to be our gala red carpet, and all of these old folks were going to be able to come out. And I felt so, like, it was a bummer for me. I felt, of course, it was sad to do that, but for them, I felt like this could be their last time on the red carpet. Like Mamie Van Doren, I don't know how many more times, or Jean LaBelle, or many of our stars, and it was really, Jean was so excited, and it was so disappointing that they couldn't experience that. So while I was disappointed for myself and for our great team who put so much into this film, I was more upset for them, because I felt like that was their moment. So to go back to your question, yes, we're just shopping the film right now. This was a chance to, get it in front of people for the first time, and I've been really gratified by the response. It's been really wonderful because, we've gotten some great press. Like, we got a Deadline and Variety and a bunch of other nice pieces have been posted. But what's almost been more gratifying is just individuals who came out, regular fans who've seen it, and their responses, which have been visceral, like really emotional, in a way that I had hoped for, because we really tried to in some ways undercut the inherent nostalgia of the piece, while recognizing that it still had that element, of course. And but the response from regular people has been, the letters that I've gotten since have just been, really, really amazing and moving, and people are really responding well. So the answer is yes, there will be more. We just were accepted into the San Diego Latino Film Festival, which is going to be March 21st, which is a great honor. It's one of the premier Latino film festivals in the country, and so many of our characters, our heroes, our historians are Latino, being LA, and being a large part of the boxing and wrestling crowd, and many of the fighters. So it's great to have that recognition. So we have that. We have some other festivals that we're up for, and we're in the midst of securing a sales agent and shopping the film. So that's where we're at. So there'll be spotty, for the next little bit. There'll be limited streaming opportunities. We're hoping to do some more drive-ins, and then hopefully a streaming distribution deal in the near future.
I'm putting up a banner right now, Stephen, and I want to make sure this is correct. Is the Olympic Auditorium Project, is that your channel? Because it looks like there's a lot of footage.
That is the channel on YouTube, and that is that's our Facebook page as well. It was always, this project has been an interesting one, in that the impetus, there was always an impetus to do a documentary, but I also looked at it as a cultural engagement project as well in the city of Los Angeles, because it has such a strong connection to the city, and it's a generational, generational bridge. And there's a lot of, we have a very active social media, and the amazing thing is how many people send me messages saying, my grandfather fought at the Olympic, my uncles fought at the Olympic, or they would go to the Olympic and tell me stories, and so it's, it's been this amazing process that's very, it's really emotional work. And it's, like in the last couple of days, we lost Danny Valdez. Danny Valdez, was a California, featherweight champion twice. Won it at the Olympic, was from East LA, and I got to know him and his daughter, who would bring him to all these. There's a very tight knit boxing community in LA, and Bobby would come out, and Danny would come out, and in recent years he's been pretty infirm, but his daughter would bring him, and so there's another link. He won that title in '58 or '59, one of the two, and so we see these folks passing, and COVID has been another, I think, thing that makes maybe the film hit home even more. The losses that we've all seen and endured over the last few years, that seeing so much history, and when their stories are gone, they're gone. That's one thing that I realized, like, and that's why I interviewed Don Chargan 3 times, drove up to Cambria 3 times to interview him, because, Don was the most knowledgeable person maybe in the country on boxing. He started promoting when he was called the boy promoter.
Yeah.
He had the institutional knowledge of boxing that he had was encyclopedic. I would call him up and we would talk on the phone all the time when I just had a question, and I just tried to get as much as I could from him while he was around. And in fact, I drove up, he had brain cancer and was dying, and I was in touch with his family, and I said, I'd love to show Don the film in its rough cut stage, just so, if he wants to, if he's able, if he's interested. And they said, yeah, come up. And so I drove up there and showed him the film on a laptop with him, with headphones on and a grin on his face. And he went to sleep after that. I said goodbye, and he died a couple days later. And that was just like, it meant so much to me. And it meant, that's, I guess, I tried to make the love come through in every frame of this film, and the respect that I had for all the people, all the participants. I didn't want it to be hagiography, but I wanted it to be something that was true, that captured an essence of LA and an essence of boxing and wrestling and roller derby and music that it was gone, and do it in a way that was not pandering, but that showed the vitality and why it mattered, why the Olympic mattered, and why it still matters. And that was my mission. And I give so much credit to the team that I can't take all the credit myself. We had Tony Peck, who was my DP, went all around the country, shooting this thing, and was so just vital. Robert Benavidez, my producer, was there and fought for me, with me along the way, and brought so much knowledge and love of boxing and film, and is a great DP himself. And Mary McAnulty worked with me on the story. We just, this was an intricate, difficult film to cut. It was such a challenge to bring through the threads of this film, which was, the building, Eileen, and the city, and the passage of time. And so to thread that needle required just endless amounts, 50 interviews, in-depth interviews, to get those voices to sing, and for the story for all the elements to play out in a satisfactory way was probably the biggest. Well, there are many challenges, but to make it work, I'm a story guy. I'm I really believe that, you're only as strong as the ability to, as cool as the archival is, as great as the music is, if the story didn't play, if we couldn't meld those elements, and for a long time it wasn't working and it was driving us crazy. And so anyway, I don't want to drone on, but that was the challenge, and I really wanted to bring that forth. And I give all the credit to Karen Tracy, Mary McAnulty, Gene Aguilera, who's the Duke of East LA, and the boxing, my boxing and East LA music connection, and Rob and Tony, and many others, but that was the core team, and I give them so much credit for the success of this film.
Well, I want to ask these guys, and I'm sure you guys still have questions, and forgive me, but I really want to know, as film experts yourselves and film historians, Stephen, that's amazing to hear, because I really congratulate you, got all of your crew, and not only putting such a cohesive movie together, but also the pacing of documentaries that I have suddenly at least been aware of in the last 10 years has taken such a leap forward. And I remember thinking that the old Robert Evans Kid Stays in the Picture documentary was a big leap forward, the way they kind of made stereophonic photographs and some of the other angles and the way that they treated and would do a photo montage. And now, truly, Stephen, your movie moves. It has an energy to it, the right choices of music, the right presentations in a very modern way of these beautiful shots that do go back to the 20s. And honestly, I just want to hear Eddie and Mike's thoughts on just from a filmmaking standpoint.
As far as I watch it, I don't think you have to be a boxing fan to enjoy this. I don't think you have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy this, because it's a story really well told. And what's fascinating about it is that Stephen was able to jam in a lot of stuff without it feeling like there's just too much. I'm overwhelmed. The story moves beautifully. It's the story of LA from the 20s into the time period that the Olympic lasted, and to what happened to the Olympic ultimately. But I loved how you weaved in the boxing and the wrestling and the roller derby, and especially the music, because I'm a guy who grew up on punk music, so the LA punk stuff I found just fascinating. And when you walk away from a movie, if you watch it and you say, "God, I wish I had some more," I think that's the ultimate compliment for me, because when it was done, it was like I couldn't get enough.
Eddie?
I appreciate so much everything that Stephen just said about the mission he was on, and I'm thrilled to say, mission accomplished. I mean, it works. You did all that and it works. And I honestly don't think you're going to have much of a problem selling this and finding distribution for this film because of Eileen. I mean, the Eileen Eaton story is so fabulous, and it makes it so contemporary that's why people who aren't boxing fans, and as a guy who has written novels set in the world of boxing, who has a predominantly female readership for those books, and women who don't watch boxing, but they read the books, and I don't have a female protagonist. I have a male protagonist. So that is easily overcome. I mean, Eileen is such an incredibly strong character and speaks to women of today as like, hey, you want to know how you got here? Here's Eileen Eaton. She kind of helped pave the way for, if you could be successful in a man's world, and let's face it, there is no bigger man's world than boxing. Anything is possible. But also, like Michael said, I was so intrigued by the way you wove the history of Los Angeles into the story, because years ago, in honor of my dad, I created a boxing museum in San Francisco that attempted to do the exact same thing, only it was a physical space that people could enter and see all of the history of San Francisco boxing. And clearly my mission in that was not just to glorify the sport of boxing. I don't even know if that was part of my mission. It was to tell the tale of San Francisco coming to life through this sport, because it is a sport of the underclass, and the role that Mexican Americans played in revitalizing the Olympic, and the way Eileen and Don tapped into that was just so exciting. And you have this overarching storyline, but then you weave in all these short stories, the Enrique Bolanos story and the Mondo
Amazing.
Ramos story,
Yes.
The Gorgeous George story, all of that. It just, you did that seamlessly by keeping the Olympic as the thread, so that Eileen played a part. But when you swerve off to talk about Mondo Ramos, you don't lose the thread at all. It was just beautifully done. The editing was spectacular.
Yeah, completely agree.
And that, I give credit on that to two people, Shane McClafferty, who is like, he cuts to music like nobody's business. I mean, that is, I know, Michael, you and I are we're all music fans here, and so our music supervisor is a guy named Howard Parr, who I've known for many years, and he works with some little directors like Guillermo del Toro and Mike Mills and Quentin Tarantino and people like that, And so I pulled a favor by bringing Howard into the mix. So it was an interesting collaboration on that. He suggested this band Jungle Fire, who scored the film, who were like a modern day Wrecking Crew, I think of them as. They're an 8-piece band who played everything from the bebop tunes where we get in, where we get into the 40s, to Taste of Honey, to garage rock, to electronic stuff. So versatile and so creative. And then, the songs that we licensed were mostly my choices, because they were all like, classic LA. I tried to make it also, the music all connects to the Olympic too, because all of the songs are from bands from LA or play the Olympic. So we have Bay Area band, the Dead Kennedys, who played the Olympic, but Shuggie Otis, Queens of the Stone Age, which are a little up in the desert, but kind of LA, and then all the other, Charles Wright and the Watts 103rd Street Band, Cannibal and the Headhunters. So I wanted it to feel like the music was intrinsic and correct to place. So that was really important. Shane is beautiful at cutting to music. And Mary McAnulty just sweated the story with me, and we did a lot of the fine tuning of the story edit. So that was we found a way to work as a group, even though budget-wise and everything else-wise, this was an indie film, and so we would get Shane for a chunk of time, and then he would do a flurry of stuff, and then we'd go back to the drawing board, and we realized it looks great, but the story isn't fully playing, and then we would fine-tune it, and then Shane would come in and fix stuff. So it was this, ongoing process of working things through to thread the needle, because it really was. I mean, people ask me, was this the film you set out to make? A lot of times documentaries, kind of take a different, once you start interviewing people, it goes a different direction. I wrote the treatment, and it's the treatment that we made. It was what I wanted to make. And I stuck with it because I knew that her story was the backbone. I mean, and I got pushed in a lot of directions. A lot of people were like, this should just be Eileen. This should be the Eileen Eaton story. That's what this should be. And I was like, no. As much as I love Eileen, Eileen is the character that kind of drives through the center of the film and that you identify with and that gives you a focal point, and she's incredible. But this is an LA story, and this is the story of the building, and it's not that it's disrespectful, but I have such strong voices and the fighters mattered. It wasn't like a promoter is great, but who bled? It was the fighters who risked their lives. So I wanted to honor them and the musicians and the people for whom it mattered so much. And it would feel almost like, I hate to say this, the white savior thing to just make the promoter the entire, kind of centerpiece of the film. The boxers, whether it's Julio Cesar Chavez, who we were so fortunate to get, and that was a Rob persistent thing that we were able to get him, Rob Benavidez, or Frankie Duarte, or
Carlos Palomino.
Palomino.
Fantastic segment.
Well, that was just
because
sorry. Go ahead.
When I think of the Olympic, I think of him. I mean, he's. I mean, I'm from that generation that watched him fight on TV, so I think of him. So I'm so glad you got him on camera.
Carlos,
and it's also vitally. It's so beautiful in the film to see the way all of these men relate to Eileen, and that to me was really enough, to see the relationship that Don had with Eileen, and then to see the fighters and Palomino's stuff with Eileen is just so beautiful. You got that. And honestly, I don't really know. Number one, if they made the Eileen Eaton story, they would do it as a fictional film, and it would have none of the impact because I don't care who plays her. It's not Eileen Eaton. And even in still photographs, you see something in Eileen's face and in her eyes that is exceptional. That is the shrewdest, toughest business person you have ever encountered in your life is Eileen Eaton. When she gives you that look, man, it is like,
and you had the people who knew her describing that look and that intimidation. If she gave you that look, it was that look. You could walk in and you knew, and it was. These stories are amazing, and that's what kind of builds who she is. And I didn't know that. I never met her, of course. I didn't know. I knew about her through boxing.
Yeah, we only knew the name.
But your movie really introduced who she was and how she impacted not only the auditorium but all these people's lives.
Absolutely, and I've got a lot of questions regarding that. But it's an interesting contrast and I think it was a stroke of genius, Stephen, to have Jackie Callan in the movie, another strong woman, and definitely a loner surrounded by men during her prime as a boxing manager. Someone that I got to cover several times watching and covering James Toney fights, being here in the Midwest and them coming out of Detroit. And I think of, as Eddie said, if they were to attempt Eileen's story, they would fictionalize it much like they did with Jackie Callan's story in that Meg Ryan, Omar Epps film, Against the Ropes, I think is the right title. And again, I thought it was fantastic that Jackie is talking about Eileen, and I had completely forgotten and was so excited to see that one Tony fight with Tim Littles that happened at the Olympic. And I was like, oh, I remember that fight. That's fantastic. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, again, this very tough woman, but man, I mean, and again, due respect to Jackie Callan, who had her own demons to deal with and pushback that she absolutely lived through. But man, I'll tell you, it's like comparing Tex Ricker to Don King, or some of the other great. It's like, listen, Don King did a lot. Tech Circuit for his time, though, he had the world's attention without the addition of electronic media and the like and everything. So yeah, any thoughts of getting the Jackie Callan stuff on film, which I thought was great.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, Eileen, we could talk for, I feel.
We'll do another podcast just about Eileen.
I'm so. I feel like I got to know her because I spent so much time, and there's so much more. Again, with all this stuff, I have so much more detail. I mean, when you talk about like that I couldn't use. I mean, it was so hard. They talk about one of the things in editing, you're killing babies. The things that you love in the film. And Dick Enberg tells an incredible story about Eileen Eden. He talks about her. I mean, interviewing Dick Enberg was just incredible. That was one of the earlier interviews that we got. And it was the one that I took being a first-time filmmaker, I took the path that I would try to work my way up. So I was able to get Gene, which gave me legitimacy, Gene LaBelle, which gave me legitimacy to go to this next group of people. Gene got me to Don, and then that opened up all these worlds. And then, so ultimately I pulled a favor from a friend, Tom Vickers, who may be watching this, and his brother Bob, who knew Dick Enberg. And Dick, he, I think, was kind of first reluctant to let us into his home. Not that he was just like, I came with Tony Peck. We went to, and it was just the two of us. We went to his house in Del Mar. He let us in. He was kind of first like, okay, I don't have much time for you. And then once we started talking, and he knew I was prepared, and he was incredible. And he told this story about Eileen that I couldn't include, where it was basically, he said he'd started, this was his first job in LA. This was where he got his start, really, other than doing basketball, Big Ten basketball. And then he came out to teach at Northridge, and then wanted to get before it was Northridge, but he wanted to break into the business. And so he was given the job of doing boxing, and he really wasn't that psyched about it. And he early on, Eileen was like, she was such a control. He didn't say control freak, but he called her a control type person. And she would literally pull his earphone off, and while he's on the air, and say, "We're not pitching the roller derby enough. Talk about the roller derby." And he said he was going to quit. He went to his, his agent or whatever, and said, "I don't think I can do this anymore. This is too much." And he said, "Give it a little more time." And over time, he said, she warmed to him and came to respect him. And he respected her, that she knew who she was. Like, he said, she knew who, like, every person sweeping the building was, to every fighter. It was her building. She knew everything about it. She worked harder than everyone, and that's how she succeeded in a man's world. Was like, she was better prepared. She was tougher. She took no shit. And you came in, you respected her, or you were out. And so that was the thing that I came to. And she was very smart. When the Olympic was dealing with, she, even though she was the power behind the Olympic, she wasn't the face until the 60s. Before that, it was her husband, Cal Eaton, and it was Babe McCoy, who was the mobbed up matchmaker at the Olympic back in the day. And she was sort of behind the scenes, even though she really was at the center of everything going on. So she was able in some ways to kind of, dare I say, use them for cover, in a way, use the men who were out in front connecting with the mobsters and dealing and monopolizing, wrestling and boxing. And they ended up ultimately going down, which allowed her to rise. So I think, not to say she was at all conniving, but she was smart enough to stay behind the scenes in a way where, at a time when boxing was so riddled by the mob, that so she could have, in a sense, like a step between her and the worst of the business. So anyway, I digress.
Well, I wanted to build on that, and I'm glad you say that, Stephen, because honestly, as a boxing student of boxing history, I was very interested on the Babe McCoy period. That obviously, and again, we're kind of dancing around it for people that don't know, the International Boxing Club and boxing in general kind of came under suspicion by the Senate, and there were hearings, much like, to compare them to other hearings, today's hearings that we see with Congress, but with a lot more severity and a lot more consequences. Nowadays, when the Senate does something, it's a slap on the wrist. It's very rare that you see the literal shutdown that happened to boxing in the early 60s. And Eddie, I want you to build on it because you could probably tell the story better than I can. But yeah, I was wondering about Eileen's, as you're saying that she was insulated. Was she truly? I mean, and again, I don't mean to misjudge her character in any bad way, but truly it was part of the business. You couldn't do boxing business without dealing with the mob because they owned, if not directly the fighters, they owned the frontman management that reported back to the mob kings. All that came out in the Senate hearings. So could you answer that? And again, I want Eddie to build on this portion of the history that, you guys acknowledge, but you don't spend a lot of time on it either.
Eddie, you want to start?
Well, I'm happy to discuss that, but I did want to say one thing, coattailing on what you had just said previously, Steve, and that is talking about Eileen, and I was very moved by the film because it's about a time when people like this could exist in America, right? It was, as you put it so eloquently, like the Olympic was her domain. She ran everything. And I love when you said that she knew the name of everybody who worked for her and was watching, because this is what we do not have in the culture today.
Yep.
And to me, this is like the biggest loss, is when television took over everything and when corporations took over everything, you no longer had the possibility of greatness, where somebody can just have a job and develop into the greatest person to do that job, right? And I mean, that's what Eileen, and also that's what Don did, right? When he grew up into being Don War-a-Week Shargan, the greatest matchmaker in the country.
Yep.
But if television had swooped in and taken over, and if some big corporation had bought out the Olympic and not allowed somebody like Eileen to run the show, it just wouldn't be the same. And that really came through very, very strongly in your film. Yeah, and as for the organized crime stuff, always there, but having grown up on the West Coast, and my dad being so deeply involved in it, true or not, I mean, I was always told by everybody in the game, like, oh, the West Coast isn't as bad as the East Coast.
Okay.
I mean, it's nobody's clean.
Sure.
But there are degrees of corruption. And the impression that I grew up with was that the West Coast was cleaner than the East Coast, definitely.
Well,
I think it was cleaner, but not clean. And
my point exactly.
That Babe McCoy was mob connected. He was known as the West Coast's, connection to Blinky Palermo and
East Coast guys, yeah.
East Coast guys.
Yeah.
And if you had a fighter that, you'd send fighters to the East Coast, they got their, the fighters would come to the West Coast, they got their piece. Babe was really close with Mickey Cohen. Super. I mean, they testified at each other's, as character witnesses for each other.
Crazy.
When you've got Mickey Cohen as your character witness, you are
Crazy.
doing something wrong.
Mickey was connected to the Olympic his whole life. He fought at the Olympic.
Yeah. And then he had Don Jordan was his guy.
And Don Jordan's story is one of the great boxing stories. I mean,
100%.
That was the fight with with Virgil Akins. The two fights, the one at the Olympic and one back in St. Louis, brought down Frankie Carbo, Blinky Palermo, the LA
IBC. Well, not only the LA mob, but even, and again, from Chicago, Chicago's involvement in stranglehold on boxing and New York with the IBC. I mean, Jim Norris and Arthur Wirtz here in Chicago pulling the strings or compliant to Carbo and Palermo. I don't think we'll ever, sadly, everyone's dead. I tried Ben Bentley, the great press agent for the IBC and Chicago sports impresario for his entire life, got to know him in the 90s. And I'm like, come on, Ben, tell me something. And he's like, Jan, you're press. You're not going to get anything out of me. I'm sorry. And I'm like, I get it. It's cool. Truman Gibson, their front.
Still won't talk about the mob. Like he there's a, it's a side story, but there's Don Jordan to me is one of the most fascinating characters ever in boxing. And the fact that, he was an LA guy, he would chain smoke like 5 packs of cigarettes a day. He beat great fighters and would lose to terrible fighters. And then being at the center of these fights Don told me the stories of what happened. Basically they controlled, what was Jordan? Was he a welter or
welterweight?
Yeah.
And they controlled the division. The mob controlled the division. Virgil Akins was the champ. And if you beat the champ, you then become the mob's fighter. So in an upset, Jordan beats Akins at the Olympic in 57, I think, or 58. And the mob comes, they're having a party, and they say, okay, it's time to turn him over. And Don was involved with Jordan at the time, and it was a guy named Jackie Leonard. And they threatened them, and they said, okay, all right, well, your fighter's going to come back for a rematch in St. Louis. And if he loses, well, fine, we'll let you off. And if he wins, he's our fighter. Okay.
Yep.
And he goes back and he wins. And they're having a post-fight celebration at a hotel, and knock on the door, and it's Blinky Palermo. And it's like, now's the time. And they said no. And so they went back to LA. Jackie Leonard's house was firebombed. He was beaten over the head with a lead pipe. And that led to the hearings that brought down, these guys. And so the level of detail of that I have in my interviews that my goal is to make this a docu series, because I have the materials to turn it into such that would be incredibly wonderful and deep and interesting, both along so many levels. But
well, can I interrupt right there?
Yeah.
Because this is something kind of near and dear to me, and I'm finally understanding how this all works, is because of digital media and because of the internet and all this, there's no more cutting room floor, right? Nothing has to get left cutting room floor. It may not be part of your main documentary, but if you record an interview with somebody and there's good stuff in it, there's a way to get it out there so that it's not lost, And this is something that we're doing now, like with TCM. It's like they encourage me now when I do interviews with people to just do whatever you're going to do with the knowledge that it's going to end up being a 6-minute piece at the beginning of the film or something. But if you talk for 30 minutes, talk for 30 minutes. We put it in the bank. We put some of it on social media. We have it to save for future use on air or something. So I love you're saying this, Stephen, because you know, I want to see all this stuff. I want to see the uncut interviews with Don. That's what I
and I was thinking about that with
amazing. I mean, just you know, the things that pop, you know, into the Destroyers interview, the wrestler is so great. It's so great. And so, you know, telling stories about Gorgeous George and his bar, and Gorgeous George, you know, is down on his luck because Gorgeous George was the biggest star there was at one point in time, and he was a millionaire, and he had a turkey ranch, a purple turkey ranch, where he'd sold dyed turkeys, and people would come out and buy a purple turkey. It was the orchid color. He called it orchid. He had Rolls Royces. He had, you know, 100 robes, and then he was a terrible alcoholic, and he had multiple divorces, and he ran through all his money. And at one point, he goes to he asks Dick Beyer, the Destroyer, to come to his bar in the Valley one afternoon, and he begs him to have a match with him where he would a hair versus mask match, and he would lose and have his head shaved. And Dick Beyer was kind of horrified because he was the big, you know, he was the big star, and the Olympic wouldn't take his fights and his wrestling anymore because he had been such a both unpredictable, terrible, and his act had run thin. And his story about that is just, it's like, I wanted it in the movie, but it just didn't fit. It couldn't fit in the movie. And that times 100 in this film of moments that are incredible and really moving, and pieces of American history and pieces of cultural history that are just, I fell in love with my characters. I have wonderful relationships with them to this day, or their families.
Mm-hmm.
Don Chargan Jr. was sending me, you know, great wishes, and Jackie Denkin, Marty Denkin's daughter,
Marty Denkin,
whose voice, that New York accent, just cuts through this film in such a great way. And you know, of course, Carlos called me. He drove down. He's staying up in the Bay Area right now, Eddie, and
awesome.
He drove down for the premiere. And these are relationships that will last the rest of my life. I feel so close to everyone. This is one of those projects that, though this film is, you know, the centerpiece, it's the hub of a universe, the way I see it. I can't see disengaging in it for a while.
I think that's such a great idea, Stephen, to go ahead and expand on that, because when you were talking earlier about like stuff that you had to cut, and you were talking specifically about some stories that you wished had been in there, my first thought was, God, boy, it would be great to have a Blu-ray or a DVD, and it would have all these extras, and you'd have all the extra, you know, interviews. But even better than that would be, you know, what you
Tales from the Olympic, absolutely, man, or Tales from LA boxing or wrestling. However you want to position it, and you already know that, Stephen. And Eddie, that's why when you brought it up, and Michael, same thing, believe me, I've been waiting to spring that exact question, and it's so great that you are thinking that way. And truly, you've satisfied my IBC Olympic Connection answer that, like you said, that could be its own 2-hour movie or hour episode.
I think, like I said, I couldn't get enough. You know, when it was over, you know, I felt like, wow, I wish I could have some more. You know, it was perfect, but it was like I could get some more. I wish I could get some more. So that's why it's really nice to hear that, you know, you're gonna.
Well, it's like, I mean, look, it's like a band. Like, you know, what do you want? You want a band that plays 5 too many songs, or do you want to play just enough to that it's like it satisfies you?
Exactly.
But would love to hear you like, oh,
Leave
I
them
got to
wanting
in your
more.
car. You want to hear more?
Yeah,
It-
leave them
it's-
wanting more.
And that was by design on some level, because I wanted it to be like an action-packed 80. I mean, it's an 82-minute doc. It's not long. I wanted it to be like where it left you wanting more, and hopefully that's what, you know, how I could, you know, the plan, the hope is that it becomes a doc series, and then with the individual interviews and other pieces that we can't use as part of these other extended pieces, say on wrestling, you know, there seems to me a great doc of wrestling from Gorgeous George to Vince McMahon, that era, the territory system and that whole era of
Absolutely.
you know, we didn't really, I mean, the film side, Eddie, I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, we couldn't, I mean, all the great movies that were shot at the Olympic Auditorium and all
I had
who are
said
still alive and should be interviewed. I mean, I would love to talk to Scorsese about shooting Raging Bull at the Olympic. I would love to talk to Clint Eastwood. I would love to talk to Stallone, because they, I mean, you know, I have the stub, which when I saw the Raging Bull story in Ringside Seat, I was like, I have the ticket stub that was the invite for the extras for Raging Bull that I'll send you guys if you want it. That's kind of great.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. I'll post that.
But there's so many film history from Buster Keaton to you know, Keaton to the end, the music story of the Olympic from, you know, there's an incredible Little Richard story and show that happened in 1970 when Bill Graham attempted to break in LA. And no venues would take him, but the Olympic, of course, Eileen, sure, you can rent the venue. And he did a series of shows. Frank Zappa played with Love, Lee Michaels. There were about 6 or 8 shows, and one of them was Little Richard, who was not closing the show. Country Joe and the Fish were closing the show, which Little Richard, I'm sure, saw as an insult. Anyway, the show was ecstatic. This was 1970, and Richard was on his comeback, and he was driving the audience into a frenzy, and he invited the stage was in the ring, and he invited the crowd on stage, and the crowd, like the whole crowd was dancing with a huge band, and it was this like almost ecstatic, orgasmic moment when it all collapsed. And the whole, with the Hammond organ, the drums, the whole thing collapsed in. And he talks about it in his book, in his as told to autobiography. There are newspaper stories. I have many witnesses, but there's no footage. There's no photograph. But I want to tell that story. But anyway, there's the whole musical history.
That is a classic, because it's like, Pete Townsend, you think you're something smashing a guitar? Little Richard brings down the whole thing.
Literally
down the ring. And there were major injuries. I mean, people broken wrists and all sorts of things. It was a major thing. And so that ecstatic fervor that extended, there was something about the place. And I guess I'm sure many other.
I would have given anything to have seen Eileen's reaction to that.
Absolutely.
Well, holy cow.
But here's one thing. She didn't care. You saw that there's the clip in the movie, you know, where the biggest ride in Olympic history in '64, where the Japanese guy Ebihara got the decision over Alacran Torres, and they burned the play, they tore it apart. And her thing was like, I'll get more press out of this, and I have insurance, and I'll allow me to fix up the building. And hey, roller derby's coming in. She was
clean it up for roller derby.
Like, how can I promote?
That
to me was like one of the great things. Like in the midst of this post thing, she's being interviewed by Tom Snyder of all people, fantastically, and he was a local TV guy, and she turns lemons into lemonade. It's like, hey, I think people, what do you think? Is this going to kill boxing in LA? No, actually, it's going to make more people more interested. They want to come down and see it. So.
And
I wanted John to show. I had talked to him before. I wanted him to show that it's my favorite scene in Raging Bull, where he goes in to fight for
Jimmy.
title.
Jimmy Bivens.
Yeah, I thought it was the Bivens fight. Go on.
That is that walkthrough, and it's the Olympic. It's the Olympic, and I said, John, I said, can you show that clip, because that'll show off the Olympic, and it shows, so many people have seen Raging Bull. I know he can't show it because of copyright reasons, but I think it would be great for you to, do this thing where you're like, you're expanding and doing movies and
100%
and doing music also, because I know there's some great punk bands played at the Olympic, and I don't know if some of the footage is there, are like the Germs.
I have a much bigger punk rock section, and it's again, that was another thing that was sacrificed along the way, because what was clear to me in this, what was clear to me was that punk rock needed to be a coda in this story, because the epic Eileen story, if you end, Eileen's death is so emotional to me, and Don, the way Don tells it, and the whole end of an era thing, that punk rock, if that was too long, it would unbalance the film.
Understood.
Right.
And so it needed to be, Gary Tovar, the brilliant promoter of Golden Voice, to me was the last impresario of the Olympic. Eileen was the major impresario, and Gary was understood. Gary was a real promoter, not to diss Bob Arum and the Grand Olympic era, but it didn't really play out for very long. I mean, one thing that people keep calling it the Grand Olympic, it was only the Grand Olympic for about 10 years. It was the Olympic Auditorium. And my boxing historians get really mad when people call it the Grand Olympic, because that was the period that Arum came in and Oscar, and that Tony fight was part of the reopening of the Olympic, and it was a shell of its former self. They kind of they made the building generic. They took away the last of what was the remnants of the old thing, and they made a go. They did a number of fights, some good fights. I remember De La Hoya. What's that?
Oscar De La Hoya fought like on national television from there.
Yep.
Yeah, that was his first title, Jimmy Bradall.
Right.
So, but the now I've lost my train of thought.
The punk. Sorry, I don't. If you found it,
it was great. And I have plenty more. But it just, so that the music side of it, I would love to do a music doc, because there's
100%.
There's a great, from John Lydon's first, LA appearance.
Wow.
Public Image Limited, yeah.
The Sex Pistols never played LA. They played Winterland in the Bay Area, and Malcolm McLaren took them on all this funny. They didn't want to play major markets. Not to say San Francisco was a major market, but they didn't play New York, and they didn't play LA, and they. So when there was so much anticipation for when PIL was going to play LA, and everyone wanted them to play a punk set, and they were, more like post-punk dub stuff and it was a very violent show. Los Lobos opened up and got, people threw cans and bottles at them. And
is there footage of the Pill show, Stephen? Is there footage of the Pill show?
No, there's a audio recording, but some great stills. It was well shot, and that was the same. A few days later, they did their infamous American Bandstand. It was the same LA trip where one of the most infamous American bandstands in its history, where they basically didn't play along to the lip sync, and they pulled the audience on the stage. It was sort of a performance art piece, but.
Well, that's why when you mentioned this Little Richard concert that wasn't filmed, and this is something that I'm sure all four of us are aware of, but I'll remind the audience because we are so constantly videotaped and now digitally recorded since the 90s. There's not a minute of the last 30 years of significance that isn't taped somewhere. So it's that early from literally the silent era to the 1980s where there are still gaps in what is recorded, literally recorded history. And I think that's what's great to get the people that were there to fill these gaps with these interviews. And truly, Enberg talking about the beginning of his broadcast career. Roddy Piper, who we haven't mentioned in this conversation, I'm sure that's an hour or two. And I know hearing his great interviews before he passed away, what kind of amazing storyteller and history he had, both with and prior to the WWF years and things. So it's really fantastic that people like yourselves are the archivists that they are and archaeologists that they are to truly find and keep these stories. Otherwise, they are going to be lost to time. I try to do that with my main Word Balloon show in the comic book and nerd world and talk to as many of the old timers that are still with us to get the story straight. Because a lot of rose-colored glasses interpretations of it must have been like this. There's too much fan appreciation without facts. And it's great that you've got, like I said, what you're doing and to go in these different directions. There's my soapbox. I'm done. But anyway.
The archival was very challenging in this film. I mean, there is, for a weekly boxing show that Eileen had on KTLA and then KCOP, most of that stuff is gone. There's very little, unless, I found kinescopes, I found collectors, I found the best I could. The UCLA Film and Television Archive was vital. They had that, when we got that KTLA interview that starts the film that runs throughout, which was shot for the Danny Little Red Lopez Bobby Chacon fight in '74.
Classic.
And that once I found that, it was like the key, because it allowed me to keep her in the film throughout. I mean, so that was, oh God, that was.
I know that feeling.
That feeling that allows you to tell the story, like you find that piece. Oh.
You just unlocked it. Now we can actually do this movie because now we have her speaking for herself. I know it is archaeology. It is archaeology. I know when I was that boxing museum that I was creating in San Francisco, I talked all about all these old fight clubs that existed in San Francisco, but I had nothing. I had no actual
representation,
visual evidence or representation of any of this stuff. And there was a guy, I'm telling you, I forgive my detour, but I can so relate to what you're saying, Stephen. So there was a guy who was just a fight fan, and he left all of this stuff to my dad in his will, right? And I was putting this museum together and I'm going through this guy's stuff, and literally I am opening envelopes of family pictures and all this stuff. And I'm not lying. This is absolutely the truth. I'm sitting on a cold cement floor in the Civic Auditorium, not the Olympic Auditorium, the Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, where I had a storage unit because we were going to put the museum in there, freezing my ass off literally on the floor, going through this guy's history of all of his belongings. The last box, the last envelope, in the last box, I open it up and they were beautiful negatives of every one of those fight clubs in San Francisco. The guy had gone out one day like he knew that I was going to be doing this decades in the future. He had gone out on one day and photographed one picture of all of them. It was like, here's Garibaldi Hall, here's the bucket of blood, and here's the, at 11th and Mission Street, the Coliseum Bowl. It's like, gee, it's all here. It was unbelievable. And I was able to get, clean, beautiful blow-ups of every one of these. And all these fighters who came through were like, oh my God, there it is. I never thought I'd see it again. So I know that feeling.
It is an incredible feeling. And it's, one of the other things that happened, we did a Kickstarter campaign, and through that we raised our social media profile. And through that, a guy reached out to me and said, hey, I bought a batch of negatives years ago of this pair of photographers, there's a bunch of photos of Eileen Eaton. Would you be interested in them? And I said, yeah. And it was for the Sports Illustrated. In 1967, she won the Boxing Writers of America Award for Promoter of the Year. And she was shot for Sports Illustrated by these independent photographers who owned their own negatives. They used 3 of the shots in the story, and I got 20 rolls of negatives of film of her at home. All those great shots of her, with Jimmy Lennon, and those 60 shots in her office that are so beautiful. Again, there was, because she was a woman, because she was behind the scenes, there was hardly any of her. There were tons of Cal Eaton, with the fighters, in the 40s and 50s. That was easy to find. But Cal, not to diss Cal, but Eileen did all the work. Cal was really the face of because he was a man. And he was, he was acceptable, but, Cal was an alcoholic. He was barely around. He was at the golf course. Eileen was doing the work. So Cal was well documented. He'd show up for the weigh-ins. Eileen, there was nothing, very little of her young. And then finding these pictures of her in the 60s, really allowed us to help tell that story. So all of these things just get disgorged as people find out what you're doing. And I'm sure more will be disgorged now that the film is coming, because just people are holding on to this that their family had, that they collected, they put in their, in their basements, their garages, and all of a sudden stuff shows up. And, without some wonderful bits of luck and very generous people along the way, this couldn't be done. But there's so much more. The archive that some of it, I've tried not to become a big collector myself. I've collected some stuff because I just don't have room for it, and I don't want to get into that mindset, that world. But I have access to all the many amazing collections, and that's what allowed this film to be done too.
Would you ever consider talking to, and maybe you already have, the Canastota International Boxing Hall of Fame, or some of the other existing, and I don't even know, Eddie, I don't know the West Coast ones, if they're beyond what you try to do in San Francisco. Obviously.
Yeah, this is very tricky. It's a question the very first question I had for you, Stephen, had to do with what will be the disposition of all of the stuff that you have collected, like as an urban archaeologist, which is what you are, obviously. Because I've gone through that. My boxing museum that I created in San Francisco after the earthquake, I got moved out of that building for retrofitting, and then the city administration changed, and the new administration was not as big on a boxing museum as the previous one. Yeah. And I have it all in storage. I have the entire thing in storage. I have a huge collection of memorabilia, and like you, a million stories to go along with every piece of it that was collected, like how it came into my possession. And it's very, very interesting. especially when you're, giving an interview or something is one thing, but if you're actually sharing an actual object or an artifact, I learned a lot in doing that. Like the fighters wanted to give it to me because they wanted to be remembered. Yeah. And their wives said, don't give him anything. It's worth money. Why are you giving it to him? He's going to make the money. We should be making the money. And I'm like, what money?
Well, that is, I mean, yes, we could, it's a very, my experience is the same. It's a very tricky thing. And again, that's why I've tried to not personally collect all that much, because I know what a rabbit hole it can be. I have, the pieces that I got that I felt were really important, or that like I needed, or that were given to me, or that were really, oh, what a great deal. God, I found this on eBay. It's like $10 for this shit. Yeah, I'll get it. But as far as the other stuff, I mean, it's very political. And there's a lot of boxing halls, and they all have their pluses and minuses. And, I'm trying, what I'd really like to try to do is interest, a major museum or institution to become the curators of that, and the holders and the preservers of that, and to attach ourselves, or to become, a part of that. I've formed really great relationships with some of our historians locally who understand how valuable boxing is. Yet at the same time, the big cost is archiving, preserving, scanning,
yep.
Eddie,
raising the money for a facility. It's just, I'm sorry, Michael.
Well, Eddie talked about, he and I had talked about all that he's got, and he had talked about doing an online virtual museum, which
was not a possibility when I did the museum originally. I mean, it had to be a physical space, but now you can actually do kind of a virtual thing. It doesn't have quite the, to me, it doesn't have quite the allure of having it in a space, Anyway,
think ways to maybe do. I think I keep, these are the questions, going back to what to do with all of the interviews, what to do with the archive, what to do with all these things, and I feel like that's they now talk about, like, when you in dining, the head to tail, like, I feel like it's a whole cow, and it's like the document, and you want to use all parts of the cow because they're all nourishment. You want to use all parts of these important both stories and bits of archival, but how to do that. And I think it's a combination of things is what I keep coming to. So maybe it's something where it's a pop-up museum for a period of time that is also then lives on digitally, but then you can do events around it that are physical, that engage people, and then you don't have to have a physical space all the time, maybe, and then you rotate it. I don't know. Or, I feel like now what's interesting, or what may be interesting with post-COVID, is how many vacant retail locations there are in every city, and the ability to kind of do eventized type of things where, it's up for 6 weeks, not 60 years. It doesn't aim to be permanent. It aims to be something that you publicize, you do events around, it draws people in, and then maybe it moves on.
Right.
And it could be a touring thing. I kind of feel like that may be the future, or at least in lieu of a huge donor who's willing to bankroll a real museum. Stallone, I want to do this. I'll fund it, along with, like, Cheech Marin he has this incredible Mexican American Latin American art collection, and he's partnered with the Riverside Museum down here and did the fundraising to put that together. And that's the kind of thing that would have to happen to be a permanent thing. So an institution, money,
ideas.
and a collector or a group of collectors who could work together to kind of do that. That's the only way I see it kind of being a going concern. But would love to talk to you, Eddie.
Well, we should compare notes on all that stuff because the one thing I love your notion of like pop-up spaces, because the one thing that doesn't come with is the political baggage. I mean, when you try to do anything that's in a permanent space, and when I did my boxing museum, the only way I could do it was I wanted it to be in the Civic Auditorium, which was now a city-owned building. So I had to get the Board of Supervisors to actually sign off on a resolution to create the museum. And needless to say, whenever boxing and politics mix, you're going to get a lot of pushback but that was fine for me because it really honed my pitch of like why boxing is important, right? Why it is the bedrock of building the city. The people who built this city, they weren't the Jefferson Starship. They were these guys in the building trades who went to boxing, who fought, they were either boxers or they were boxing fans, and they were blue collar people who built the city, right?
Totally.
And I was able to convince them of that, and they went ahead with it. But then you're always at their mercy. You're at the mercy of the government and a board of directors and everything. I mean, I learned so fast when I did that museum it looked like the supervisors were going to say yes. And I went back to my sponsoring supervisor's office and I said, what do we do now? And she says, you put together a board of directors and you make sure that every single person on that board of directors is beholden to you and will answer yes when you ask them anything. That's how you do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's not why you got into it, and that's not why I got into it either. It's like and I think that is that's the trick. I mean, it sounds, everyone or many people have who have collections want to start a museum, and there are people with beautiful collections, but a museum is a loaded situation. And if you can do something that is more where you don't have to create that kind of permanent infrastructure, you're saving yourself a huge headache. And if someone else really wants to do that, and they want to raise the money and they want to do that, and you could be the face or you could be the whatever, that's fine too, if you trust them. But to me, I keep thinking with the Olympic project is, I really want to, as you said, the people who built the city were the fighters and the fight fans and the people who and the blue collar guys. And that's why, to me, the story resonates and why it matters. And that's who the fans that's the real fans of this project, who are really super devoted. And that's who I want to talk to. And that's who I want to engage. And that's, the Olympic, Gary Tovar said it really beautifully. And again, another line that didn't make it in the movie, but the Olympic, sat at the center of LA, and LA is a city that is obviously a freeway driven, back in the old days, obviously people came via streetcar, but the Olympics sits right in the center. It's right at 18th and Grand, right in between the 10 and the 110. And the Olympic was like the beating heart of the city, and the freeways were like the veins and the aortas and the blood vessels that fed into all the neighborhoods, from East LA to West LA to Orange County, the Valley. They all fed, Beverly Hills, they all fed to the Olympic. And so I really want to do events once COVID is tamed that are located in the city, in different parts, do things with East LA museums, do events in East LA, do events in West LA, do events in the Valley to activate our city and make it a teachable moment, a chance, because my company's Gen Pop. It's like pop oriented. Like I felt like I want to reach the people, and I want to use this film as like popular history. Why does it move so fast? Why does it use popular culture? Why does it use music to drive it? Because it's teaching, but in a way that it's like the medicine can go down. In a way, it's fun.
Yes.
And why is it short and punchy? Because of that. So that's my larger mission is beyond this film. My larger mission is to use this building as a way to talk about LA and to talk about why this kind of this place of popular culture mattered to so many people, and nicely, a lot of historians are getting that. William Estrada, who's one of the most widely respected California historians, who's the chair of the history department of the Natural History Museum, is in the film, and he has been very complimentary of the work because he feels like it's under this work in his. He's like I've known about Eileen Eaton for a long time, and I asked my historians, what about Eileen Eaton? And he said most of them don't know who she is, and he thinks like this is a travesty that historians don't know who Eileen Eaton is, who are LA historians, and that they don't understand why sports and popular culture are not taken more seriously, why leisure and popular culture are not taken more seriously in historical circles.
Absolutely.
And so that's what
man.
Yes, exactly.
we need to have a long talk at some point, Stephen, or a strategy session or something, because I had the exact same experience when I was putting that boxing museum together. I went to the woman who was the San Francisco historian at the San Francisco Public Library. I won't say her name, but I went in and I said, I'm working on this project. I want to see whatever the library has on the history of boxing in San Francisco. And she said, why? And I said, because I'm going to do this museum to commemorate it. And, and I'm like, oh, because I'm going to do this museum to commemorate it. And she's like, why should that be commemorated? That's a shameful mark on our history. And I'm like, are you insane? You call yourself a historian? Yeah. San Francisco was the boxing capital of the world. Oh my God.
Corbett and everything. Yeah.
Jim Corbett put San Francisco on the map.
Absolutely.
It's odd to me. It's really odd to me. And I think and again, it speaks, again, not to be dismissive of historians. There are so many great historians and they're doing wonderful things, but at the same time, it speaks to a class, issue and a frame of reference issue. And so, I really think that, William Estrada got it because he's from East LA. He knew, he understood why, and that's why he's such a great historian, because he sees why these things matter and how the stories of people of color, why they haven't been told, is partly these things. There's so much. Yeah, it goes to history and how it's taught in America, and it goes to what is valued, and it goes to the complaints of people of color and why they're valid, that their stories aren't being told, because they aren't being told because they're not valued by the historians and by the media, generally speaking.
and the narrow venues where they could excel and be accepted by a bigger society beyond their neighborhoods and stuff completely. And Eddie, building on something you said a lot earlier, specifically about Eileen, but it really encompasses the whole film, is these stories when a local city mattered and the culture that built around the specific city, because the coaxial cable didn't connect us coast to coast from a television standpoint, or its early times. And so the city created its own culture. And that's what's so terrific about your movie, that it's Eileen's story, but it is this progression of LA, despite being surrounded by Hollywood and, exposing Hollywood and the LA scene to the globe. But still, this is an avenue where a local businesswoman like Eileen, like you said, Eddie, I mean, she was like an empress of her domain, and also that era of athletics. Again, nothing against the big time now, and thank God they make money and can play a career that damages them and at least have some level of comfort, but we all have seen the terrible consequences of physical sports. But that said, this was the era when the common man was really as close to the athlete as he could be. And in most cases, likely the athlete had blue collar jobs or off-season jobs, or when they weren't fighting, they were mechanics or whatever. My God, Harold Brazier, one of my favorite people from Indiana, and a guy that was exposed a lot on 80s television, was still a body mechanic at an Indiana, auto shop and stuff when he wasn't getting his big paydays as a welterweight and junior welterweight. So,
this was the era when athletes aspired to retire and open a service station,
or a restaurant. Absolutely.
Instead of I'm going to own a media conglomerate or something,
like Dwayne Johnson.
Like I'd like to have a little store someplace and just kind of tell tales about my great career as a boxer.
Well, compare Gorgeous George to The Rock. And like you said, the sad story of Gorgeous George, as big as an entertainer as The Rock. Sorry, Michael, please.
No, I was just going to say that, in that day, football players, baseball players, they had jobs in the off season.
I'm friends with many men now in their 70s that
they weren't sitting and working. They weren't working out, all off season.
Winter, right. Winter, they were reporting to the gas station or whatever.
Beer distributors and stuff,
Yep.
Well, I mean, Enrique Bolaños, after he worked for it was a beer distributor. Danny Little Red Lopez went into construction, and Carlos Palomino talks about that as well. He told me in our interview, he's like, I so respect Danny, and then he said fans. It's like fans are like, they almost like hate you for it, like they resent, like, hey man, like what are you doing? You're Danny Little Red Lopez, man. You're the star. Like, why are you here? Like, and Carlos, after he was like, he was off trying to he was talking about he got in this business where they were doing credit card terminals and whatever. And he's like, people would go into restaurants, do that, and people like, you're Carlos Palomino. What are you doing? What are you doing here? And he's like, I had to work. It's like there's,
hey, by the way, I have to say, I'm so glad you got that Carlos Palomino commercial.
The light beer commercial.
Beer commercial. That was so fat. The minute that came on, it was like, oh man, do I remember this spot? Oh, it was fantastic.
Well, that was a really, and the fact that we were able to clear that too was wonderful. I mean, we pushed the edges of fair use, but got it. Everything was, we were able to, we licensed what we had to license. We fair used what we could fair use with our attorney, and got it all through errors and omissions insurance, and it's all legal and legit. But it was, it was, that was a cultural, that commercial was a huge moment. And Carlos was a star. I love the guy. I really, he's a wonderful person. And I mean, Carlos is about, talk about an American. Okay. So Carlos comes, he was born in a small town in Mexico. He shined shoes on the streets in Tijuana while his dad worked to get a green card. His dad he had to come home. He and his brother would go out shining shoes. They had to come home with $2. So how he learned to fight was you would try to get a soldier, a U.S. service person, because they might give you $1 or $2, and then you're done for the day. If you're shining shoes of everyday people, they'll give you a nickel, a dime, and then you're out there.
Interesting.
So he comes across the country. He moves to Westminster, California, in Orange County. Doesn't speak English. He's kind of mocked because of it. He isn't accepted by the Mexican American kids because he can't really speak. He speaks only Spanish. He's sort of accepted because he can play baseball a little bit by the white kids. Learns gradually to speak English. His brother gets drafted to go to Vietnam. He was not going to. He knew he was going to get drafted next as soon as his brother, came back. So someone said, "Hey, why don't you come in and spar?" And he spars, and he's a natural. He's great. And so they said, because if you spar, if you're a good fighter, you can be in the boxing team, and if you win, then you can stay out of getting killed in Vietnam. And that's he became
just beat people up. You don't kill them, you just beat them up.
All Army boxing, and then came out into the Olympic, and the rest was history. But he served his country. He is as American as anyone around, and still has had to experience the last years of our existence of being treated like a second-class citizen and called all sorts of shit. And I'm not having that. And that's not what our film is about. Our film is about acceptance of people and a wider view of what an American is, and based on what you do and who you are, not anyway.
Well,
not soapbox either.
The goodness just kind of radiates out of Carlos in those interviews. He is such a good guy. It's obvious. And if I can just one other thing, if we have time, John,
all the time you guys.
One other thing I wanted to mention when we're talking about how this is specifically an LA story, it's a regional thing, pre the connectivity that puts us everywhere at all times. It's so fascinating to realize that a lot of people will watch this movie and see their own town in it, even though this is specifically a Los Angeles show. Like when I'm watching it, I'm saying, there should be a documentary about Winterland in San Francisco, because it had the exact same arc as, it was originally Dreamland. It was a skating thing, ice skating, roller skating, and then they'd put in a boxing ring, and then there was also performing arts stuff, and then it became the main event thing for boxing. Then it became a rock venue. Then it, that's where the Sex Pistols played, and that's where I saw Springsteen. The first time I saw him was at Winterland, and so many auditoriums go through that same thing. But also the roller derby section of your film is so fascinating, because everybody had one of those, right? But it was like your team in your area. Up here it was the Bay Bombers. We had the Bay Bombers, and in the Stars, you really only knew from your area. So, I knew Joni Weston and Ann Calvello and Charlie O'Connell and Cliff Butler and all the skaters up here. And then, the T-Birds would come through, and they were the heels, right? I mean,
awesome.
Your team was all baby faces, right? Until they went on the road, then your team was the heels, right?
Well, and I think, you hit on a really good point, which is, one of the critiques that I've gotten from, people in the industry, who I've tried to bring in as, like sales agents and stuff. They're like, it's niche, this film is very niche.
No.
And I say, Andre the Giant, niche. Muhammad Ali, niche. Boxing, niche.
Wrestling,
Wrestling really.
Even
And
in
the
you
point
got
you made
X.
yeah, I've been meaning to talk about X and John
Yeah.
Doe. Yes.
Yeah, that was great seeing John Doe pop up in there.
I mean, you got X in there, so even in music, it's not niche. There's nothing niche about it.
No, it's the
point that I
entire
keep
20th
trying to
century.
get across, in the fact that, as you said, Eddie, every city had their own version of the Olympic. Maybe not as big as the Olympic,
Right.
but was similar and had its own touring wrestling. That wrestling circuit, the territory circuit. Most of the same people went through all those circuits, so they'd have their own kind of local guys. But they had so that was the same. Roller derby was the same. Boxing, similar. So I don't see why it's niche. I can't understand that.
But not every city had Eileen Eaton. That's
absolutely.
That's why she is the heart of the whole thing, And I think she's the main selling point. I mean, if I was your promoter, that's how I would sell it as, the original woman in a man's world. That's what this is, I mean, yes, I get that it's about the heart of Los Angeles in this building. I get that. But to sell it is really, Eileen is the character that sells this thing.
Oh, for sure. I agree. And I think that's, that is, that is the obvious thing. I mean, she's a forgotten, genius impresario or impresaria.
That's true. I like that.
and just and a compelling character, and really interesting, and at a time when these kinds of stories
everybody wants
told and need to be told.
Yep.
In a non-condescending way. And I give, Mary McAnulty, who was my assistant editor, it was really important that I had a woman working with me on the story edit, because I really felt like, she helped give it the nuance and make it feel correct. You know what I mean? It's like, I can, not that I couldn't do it justice, but I wanted it to be seen through the lens, or a woman to be able to put it through her lens too. And we debated about a lot of things as we went through this. And the same thing with the Mexican-American story, having Gina Aguilera, having Robert Benavides, having, historians who were Mexican-American throughout the film. Like, I wanted to make sure that, because after all, this isn't my story. This is not my story. I can't, I didn't want to appropriate it. I wanted to reflect it. I wanted to be a prism from which I could take it, give it a sense of structure and the story that I felt like the right story arc to it. I wanted to get the right people in it and have this. I wanted to have a film where I could say, oh yeah, Mamie Van Doren's in it, and John Doe, and James Ellroy, and
I forgot that James was in it. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's right. Yeah,
and
Piper.
And East Bay Ray.
Piper, yes.
What other movie has that weird of a collective group of people? That's what I wanted. I thought this is LA to me. So that's
brilliant. That is brilliant.
I'll say real fast regarding roller derby. We did not have, as far as I remember, because this is the early 70s that I'm remembering, we got LA Thunderbird broadcasts here in Chicago. So they were our hero team as I remembered it as a small boy.
They were in Miami too. It was in Miami also there you
go, man. And I kind of figured that
but here's the question.
Maybe made that national contract or nationally syndicated. So yeah, what's the question?
Was it the same team?
That's a very good question. We don't know.
Right. I mean, you could just use the name and have it. I mean, this is what they used to do on a lot of the circuits.
That was the funny thing about. But actually, Chicago held the biggest roller derby match of all time. In the early 70s, before it all fell apart, because there were two rival things. There was roller derby and roller games. Roller
Okay, I remember the derby, but go ahead.
Jerry Seltzer, who was the original
Yeah.
creator, and then they left LA. There was an LA team called the Braves that was part of roller derby.
Oh,
And there was the opening. And a guy named Bill Griffiths, and I forget the other guy's name. Someone in roller derby will be mad at me for not mentioning him. But they came together and started the roller games, which was almost the exact same. There were slightly different rules. And that they started in 1960, I believe, in LA. And then they took over at the Olympic, and then they toured. But the big roller derby versus roller games match was at Comiskey, I believe.
Okay.
Like 50,000 people. It was that was the apex of it. And then the two people who ran roller games had a falling out.
Okay.
Over their egos or whatever.
Sure.
One guy left, and then from then it started to go downhill.
Okay.
That was,
but
Chicago had that, you know.
Okay, because honestly, I believe we got syndicated the KTLA product on our local Chicago stations.
So you know who
got.
who the Thunderbirds? I think it was the Thunderbirds. The
Tell me.
star on that team was Ray Robinson's son. Sugar Ray Robinson's son was the star skater.
He was a big star.
Wow.
Yeah,
he was a big star. The Ralphie Valadares was sort of the long time sort of iconic figure of the team and beloved in LA. And he was married to Honey Sanchez, the woman with the purple hair in the film, who's got so many great lines. And she called me.
She's fantastic.
Excited. Ray Robinson's son. I mean,
Reno, I think, right? Wasn't that his name? Reno Robinson? Wasn't that his name? Something like that.
That's amazing.
But anyway, yeah, I can see him clearly. You know, I can see him clearly today. You know, he had like a conch job.
Okay, sure,
You know?
sure.
I think roller derby should come back. I mean,
They've tried.
They did. Yeah, it was going pretty good. In fact, I know in the DC area when I was living there, there was like a lot of people who were doing roller derby, and it was women. It was
sure.
Right. Remember the Drew Barrymore?
Well, today, the women's roller derby today would be off the hook because, you know, you look at those women from the original era, and like Ann Calvello was like the original punk. I mean, she was a punk, and you know, she was just fan. There was a good documentary made about her a few years ago.
It is happening, but it's much more serious now. It's like it's the sort of kayfabe, fixed aspect of roller derby doesn't, like, now it's like, okay, it's just much more of a serious game, which is great. I mean, like, serious as in, you know, it's
they're playing to win.
Much more like we're keeping real. It's more like a
sport. It's more like a sport now,
rather than exhibition like wrestling.
When I lived in Alexandria, one of the teams approached me, and I designed like their logo.
Oh wow!
And they invited me to go, you know, like to check it out to see what it was like. And they were like Steve was saying, it was much more serious. It wasn't the way the old roller derby was, which was
wrestling on skates.
It was like wrestling on wheels. Yeah, it was wrestling on wheels.
Right. Well, that great Raquel Welch Kansas City Bomber movie from the early 70s. You know, yeah, man. No. Absolutely.
Which was all T-Birds as the back. It was supposed to be shot at the Olympic, but she broke her wrist in training when she fell and tried to, you know, put her hands down, and she busted her wrist. So the Olympic was too busy. Whenever they wanted to reschedule it, they couldn't do it, so they shot it up in Oregon.
Understood. Wow. You know, and again, all those movies, we mentioned it briefly, but Battling Butler, the Buster Keaton silent grade, and those great Three Stooges shorts, both wrestling and boxing. And, you know, again, like you said, all the way up to Rocky and all the other films.
The original Manchurian Candidate, you know, the assassination scene is at the Olympic. the turning point.
Oh, there's a great
Golden.
fight scene at the end. You don't see much of the fight, but it's a great scene in the auditorium where Neville Brand is up in the rafters. He's trying to kill William Holden down in the seats. That's a great scene, and it's a great look at the auditorium because they use all the corridors and everything.
They shoot from the rafters, from the catwalk,
and everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unlike Raging Bull, where they kind of hide the auditorium, even though they're shooting in it, in the Turning Point, the auditorium is the star. I mean, they show every bit of it. It's great.
Yeah, and then we have all the sorts of we did for our drive-in premiere, we did a sort of pre-show where we put together all of these because there was a really amazing what was the there's a Starsky and Hutch that has a ridiculous in the Olympic. There's an Incredible Hulk. There's we had the Munsters in the film.
Yes.
But then there's Jamie Summers. What was that? The Bionic Woman.
Sure.
There's a great one of her in the 70s running through, jumping off down into the ring, all sorts of crazy stuff that we put together for our pre-show with just ridiculous's of all the television shot at the Olympic.
Jesus, that sounds fun. Just that sounds fun. I want to see that.
It's fun. I could say if you want, I'll send you the reel. It's just classic tunes, a loop of all the great stills, and then some bits of just pop culture stuff. Because we just figured, you go to a drive-in, you get there early, you wait for it, you're sitting in your car. Why not give people some entertainment? So that's. We're hoping to do more drive-ins. I really think that in this interim period between the time that the theaters open again, I think this is a good drive-in picture.
100%.
And our hope is to kind of get some more drive-ins. We definitely have the interest right now, certainly to do it in LA. We're just kind of trying to not overplay the market until we have our real release. So it's this push-pull of trying to keep things on simmer and give people limited opportunities to see the film, but also to, I'm not making any money from a no disrespect to any of the festivals, but
of course,
I make nothing from those. So I've got to start to monetize this labor of love a little bit.
I have a feeling you'll be hearing at least, likely from all three of us, with some ideas to help you with that, Stephen. I know I have a bundle, so I know we'll be talking. And again, and please don't mistake this for we can wrap up if you want to, gentlemen. You have, but I mean, it's.
Yeah, again, I need to jump off, but I
kind of figured, but go, again. But yeah, no, I mean,
we'll definitely let's stay in touch because I could see us plotting some things together for this film. I mean, it would be fun to show a boxing movie on a double bill with your film.
Great idea.
And
I see,
there's lots of interesting potential kind of cool things because I really do. I feel like it illuminates. There's a way to illuminate film history with this as well. I've always felt like that is there's lots of, if in essence this is the hub, there are all these interesting spokes on which you can go off, and it's I think it's a teaching. I mean, it's a dynamic teaching tool is what I think of it as, not something where you're being forced to watch something and God, it's something where I want it to be a chance for people to connect with the past in a way that's visceral and present and relevant to today.
And I think the film, I could see the film connecting with younger people, especially if there was a little guide for certain questions that come up when you're watching the film, not just about Eileen fitting into this world, but the place of boxing in the community. And also, to me, when the whole thing moved over to punk, it kind of made sense. It's in some ways that's a natural progression, because the same kind of cultural forces that bring people to watch boxing are what bring people to a punk show.
100%, man.
And
the devolution of the city system that causes the response of punk music and the anger and stuff like that. So yeah, 100%, man. No, I get it and agree. Sorry.
Yeah, that was one of the tricks. One of the tricky parts for me was because I know I have an audience. I'm thinking about my audience as I'm cutting this film, and I'm going, okay, I've got them. I think I've got them. And then there's punk. And I have a lot of punk fans, and then I've got a lot of older folks who like, that is, boxing people can be pretty rigid, as we know sometimes. Like wrestling is terrible, and roller derby.
It's too bad you had to get in all that noisy music stuff. What was that all about?
Well, and that's why I wanted
to like. That's why when Gary Tovar says I knew I'd be welcome there because I'd seen what they had before. It was like a connector that allowed us to. Then we did that sort of like here. Them punching them and punching and punching and punching. Hey, it's all part of the same thing. It's the theater of violence, and that kind of allowed it to feel intrinsically correct. And so I've had very little, very few complaints thus far, and actually more kind of acceptance of punk from people who I expected to kind of hate it, that part of it. And so that was a nice. That was a real, it took a lot of thinking and nuance about how that was going to make it not feel like an outlier.
Yeah.
I'm hoping
it was nice to see East Bay Ray pop up in there too. It's like, wow, this is amazing.
Great guitar player, man.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Mike?
Just that I think I've spoken to Steve about this before, is that, I'd love to have some articles or interviews or some of the material that you've collected, that you talked about collecting, and show it in Ringside Seat, because I'd like to see, as you said, boxing people are rigid, or they don't maybe know the complete story of the Olympic, and I'd like for our readers to be able to see how rich the history of the Olympic is, that it's great boxing stuff and all the great boxing, the boxing stories that are involved in it, but also, the music that went on there, the wrestling, and there's that tie between wrestling because of Gorgeous George. Muhammad Ali was completely influenced by Gorgeous George.
100%.
I have some great clips. I mean, Gene LaBelle talking about taking Ali to see Freddie Blassie. Eileen asked Gene to put, one, he came to LA and she had him run around downtown, had the I Am the Greatest buttons made, and he did a run from the Olympic to the Main Street Gym and was handing out buttons on the street.
Wow.
And felt kind of uncomfortable about doing that. But Eileen was like, you got to keep campaigning. This is part of it, And the other part was, she put him in front of Freddie Blassie as he was doing his shtick, and they remained friends forever. In fact, when he did the Ali Inoki thing, Blassie was his manager who he took to Japan with him.
Oh, that I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
So they had this bond. He really respected the wrestlers for their whole shtick, for their self-promoting.
That's what I think. I think all of this stuff that boxing fans, that read the magazine, they may know about it, but there's probably a lot of them that don't know about it, and they don't know how rich and how deep it goes.
And it's a great entree to your film. That kind of, and again, I think, the three of us have a ton of ideas as platforms to get people to watch the movie. And again, I'm sure we'll discuss those with you individually.
I'm more than happy to do fun stuff with some exclusive clips that help illustrate that, because we have some outtakes that we couldn't use that are really great connector pieces for that, or just great little bits, little short stories that kind of illuminate various things that, again, I think I want to find ways to use with the right, with media partners to kind of okay, here, this fits with your mission and fits with what I'm trying to get across. And what good does it do to keep that sitting somewhere? I want that to circulate. It only does me and the film and all of this stuff good. And so that's definitely, and I want to do as many philanthropic things as I can too in the city to help, COVID has been so devastating to so many. I mean, to me, that's one of the sort of not so widely circulated stories about how badly COVID has devastated the boxing community. So many fighters have died, families have suffered, people in and around the business have gotten sick. There's some journalists in LA, as we well know, as you said earlier in the podcast, just that, a lot of people in boxing are not left with a lot of money at the end. So a lot of vulnerable population. So I'm open to whatever you guys want to discuss.
Good. Well, that'll be an ongoing
part of the solution.
And again, unfortunately, not thinking in brevity in terms of you with your 82-minute fantastic tight film. I really appreciate you guys hanging out for this kind of conversation. Coming out of commercial broadcasting for 30 years here in Chicago, I like the loose format, especially to get those great golden moments, which you have all provided today in this conversation. Eddie and Mike have in previous conversations, and I'm sure will in subsequent. And that's why, too, Stephen, regardless, when this moves on to either major release via streaming or theaters or both, or certainly the eventual DVD releases or Blu-rays, if hopefully the physical media shopping option is still there, and I know we're
going to do it because people have been asking so much. I mean, that people really want this on DVD. So
well, that's the thing, man. And again, thank God there are so many other avenues of your subject that we could pursue. That even this 2 hours, wasn't enough time, because there's a ton more to talk about Gene LaBelle and all these other, as you said, the spokes that come from the wheel. That is the movie. So I do hope that we will pick up this conversation.
I really enjoyed it. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with all you guys.
Absolutely. Well, everybody can see on the screen, but I will say it for the audio audience as well. You can watch clips of the documentary that Stephen used for the whole thing on his YouTube channel or his Facebook page. They're both titled the same thing, the Olympic Auditorium Project. So if you search for that on YouTube or Facebook, you'll likely find it. And again, the title of the film is 18th and Grand, the Olympic Auditorium Story.
And our website is 18thandgrand.com. So that says news and connection to all of our social. So that's another place to go. You can sign up for updates. You can buy T-shirts. You can, because we've got our classic 18th and Grand Richmond 95171 T-shirt.
Eileen would be proud of you.
Hey, you got to keep selling.
Honestly, guys, as always, great conversation, Michael and Eddie. Stephen, great meeting you. And thank you for making this important representation of an untold story, I think, of Americana.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Excellent. A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
As always, and we'll leave it there. More Great Word Balloon Live coming up later this week. Thanks for watching, everyone.